welcome back to our Fast Forward Superchargers install series. This is the second episode, and basically we're going to show what we've done so far on the teardown. We haven't really put much of anything back on the car yet, so we're just going to go through and show you what we took off the car, why, any tips or anything along the way, and then talk a little bit about the next steps. So we'll start over here on the driver's side. We've completely removed the intake that was here. We had the filter box, and then there was the tube that goes around to the back over here for the intake. All of that is going to get replaced. We did pull the heat shield off of the exhaust, and the reason for that was really just to get down here is the EGR hookup. So there's a hard line that goes around the back of the engine, and that will basically feed exhaust gas into the intake for the emission system. So we had to remove that line in order to take the intake manifold off. But otherwise, I don't think there's anything else we're really going to have to do with the exhaust. Then coming around to the front, we removed the radiator. I don't think that's completely necessary. It does open up a lot more room under here, but we are going to be upgrading the radiator, so we got that out basically first thing to clear us up some space. Then coming over to the passenger side, of course you can see the entire intake manifold has been removed. We pretty much removed all of that as one piece. On some of the later cars, like the NBs, you do have to take the throttle body off and sort of disassemble parts of the intake manifold to get that all apart. But being that this is a 96, all of that stuff kind of comes off as one piece. And we did remove also the alternator, would normally be right here. I'm not 100% sure why. We were just basically following the instructions. They said to completely remove the alternator. At this point, I'm assuming that it'll give us better access for installing the supercharger. But like I said, not exactly sure. We kind of hesitated, but we figured, we're just following the instructions, and hopefully it'll make it easier for us going forward. So as you can see here, this is everything that we had to disconnect from the intake manifold, and the fuel rail, of course, and injectors are gone, which were sort of mounted in with the intake manifold. So there really wasn't too much wiring that we had to disconnect. This is the injector harness here. You can see it's got the 4 plugs for the injectors. This just sort of goes into this sub harness. So we disconnected that just to get it out of the way. This one here is for the EGR. So basically all this stuff is just going to sort of get pushed up out of the way, and then most of that will get reused when we put the supercharger back in. We've got this water line here. This is for the oil cooler. So this water line went up to the throttle body, and I believe with the kit that's going to get routed into something else, because ultimately it has to make its way back over to the bottom side here of the thermostat housing to complete that loop for the oil cooler. And then we've got this harness here. This is the one that kind of comes across the front. So we've got the idle controller, TPS. This is for the crank position sensor, and this is a solenoid that sits on top of the intake manifold, and then the pressure switch for the power steering. So again, that whole harness gets disconnected, moved out of the way. So it looks like a lot, but it really wasn't a ton of work. Getting the bolts off the intake manifold is kind of a pain. It's actually nuts that sit on these studs, and so you got to use just the right length of extensions. Not anything too new for us, but let's see over here on the intake manifold. So the fuel rail kind of sits up on there. but basically getting extensions kind of down and under to the underside here to get those nuts. So if you got a good extension set, won't be too big of an issue. But yeah, this table is mostly the stuff that we've taken off the car. You can see there's really not a ton here. Some hoses, some bolts. This of course is the supercharger. We'll talk about that in just a moment. And then we have a box here of stuff that we're not expecting to put back on the car. So it's really just the intake tubes, the air filter, the MAF sensor will get reused, but all the plastics for the intake will not. All right, so we've started a little bit of prep for the next phase. Really the only thing that we've put on the car so far is this shiny pulley down here, which adds the 6-ribbed pulley to actually drive the supercharger. So like we discussed in the previous video, it's not going to use either of the existing belts. In fact, the power steering belt, we never even took the tension off of it yet. So that's still all set. And then we've got the alternator belt just hanging there for now. So yeah, this pulley, it comes with some spacers because I guess there's different designs of the crank pulley. And so the spacers will determine essentially how far this pulley sticks out. So for this one, this is an OEM pulley on a 96 Miata. We ended up having to use all of the spacers, and it looks like it got it just sticking out a little bit past the other pulleys. So we're gonna double check that when we start installing the belt and everything, make sure that it's straight. But we did use the spacer that came with the kit, as well as the existing OEM spacer, which is much thinner. So like between the two, it gives you a couple different combinations to make sure that the position is just right for that. So that just mounts with the 4 bolts, the same as the pulley mounts, or the OEM pulley mounts on there. And you can see they also label on here, this is a 115 millimeter, which is the one that came with the kit. That's the pulley diameter. They do make different diameter pulleys, which can basically control how much boost you get. So this is the basic one that comes with the kit, and there are other options. So the only thing that we did to make our lives easier to install this is the sway bar usually sits kind of up here, right in the way. So there's just 2 bolts. You can see the bracket right there. There's just 2 bolts on either side. This side the bracket fell off. But that'll allow that to drop down. And then if you do have an ABS car, what you'll immediately find is you take out those bolts and the ABS line gets in your way. And so if you have that problem, you've got the ABS line here, and it just has a couple of bolts that hold it onto the frame rail there. And so you just take those bolts out, and that'll allow the ABS line to just move out of the way. So nothing too tricky so far. And then we're basically preparing for the next steps, which according to the instructions will be installing sort of the bottom side of the intake manifold that's integrated to the supercharger. So what we did is we disassembled the assembly. I guess I'm not sure how to describe that. The supercharger is a separate piece that's bolted onto this. So you can see this is the supercharger itself, and then it's attached to this plate which sort of makes up the upper half of the intake manifold. So when they ship these, all the bolts in here are loose. And so basically you just take those out and separate the two pieces. So what you're left with here is this bottom piece, which this is the cast aluminum end of it. And so what this is going to do is this is just going to sit right in here like that. It is quite heavy. And then that's going to bolt in, and I believe separating them will give us better access to get these bolts. It's going to be kind of tight getting these nuts back on for the intake manifold. But that's basically the next step that we're at. And I think before we can do that, there are some notes in the instructions I'm going to have to take a look at again. I think we're going to have to disconnect some of these clips down here and sort of let these move a little further out of the way. These are your fuel lines. And on our initial test fit, it was just very tight with all this and this wire harness down here too. So just getting it down over the studs, we'll have to push this stuff out of the way a little bit. All right, guys, so that's where we're at currently. We've got a couple hours into it. I think we've pretty much got everything torn apart that we're gonna need to. And we're starting to move towards bolting some pieces on. So if you have any questions or comments, please drop them in the comment section. I'll try to answer all of them if I can. And please subscribe and get ready for the upcoming videos. Thanks for watching.